WCNC TV Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide.
Happy Sunday, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Ben Thompson. Join me today, State Representative and candidate for Lieutenant Governor Chaz Beasley, former Union County GOP Chair Dan Barry, and State Senator Natasha Marcus. Thank you, all three. I always like when you three come on. I like when everyone comes on, just so everybody knows. But I enjoy having all three of you for sure. We're a month into the new fiscal year, but North Carolina still doesn't have a budget. You may remember Governor Cooper vetoed the General Assembly's budget proposal back on June 28th. The vote to override the veto has yet to take place because Republican leaders are waiting until they have the numbers to override it. Republicans need at least 8 Democrats to come to their side. Medicaid expansion, of course, no big surprise here, remains sort of the big sticking point at the heart of the negotiations. The House and Senate have passed stopgap measures, though, to make sure some federal funding continues. We don't always talk about the budget on this show, and it doesn't make the most sexiest of topics to begin with, but it is important. We have 2 people who represent us up in Raleigh. So let us know, where do things stand? Whichever one wants to stand, wants to start.
Go ahead, Chaz. I think it's in the House right now.
Yep,
so
it is. So every year it switches places. But I think one of the things that we've seen is that we on the Democratic side of the aisle have been prepared to vote on this veto override for the last few weeks. And it's very important to remember that just because you're doing more doesn't mean that you're doing enough. Just because teachers are getting a little bit more doesn't mean that they are meeting their needs. Just because we are doing a little bit more in healthcare doesn't mean that they are being met in terms of their needs. We have to make sure that we have a budget that's reflective of everybody and not just a small group of people that are running the show in the General Assembly. So I believe that the people of North Carolina deserve for us to have a vote on this veto override so that we can start real negotiations with the governor, who has a right under the Constitution to veto the budget and who has proposed a compromise that we believe the people of North Carolina need to hear.
I don't even know if the two sides are still talking at this point, it seems, as far as the governor and Berger.
You know, all of the communication we receive is Senator Berger is asked to have a meeting. He won't have it. Asked for a debate to debate the issues. Yeah. They won't have it. There's a stalemate. What I find so interesting is Governor Cooper brought in some at-risk Democrats that we're going to break and vote to override, and introduced them to their primary opponents at a cocktail reception last week. So he's playing really hardball to make sure his override stands. All of this to give health care coverage to illegal aliens, holding hostage the pay raises to teachers, funding for hurricanes relief out east. It's really a dramatic situation, and as you said, it's not sexy. It's not on the front page of the newspaper anymore.
I bet you don't feel the same way.
Not at all. Speaker Moore actually sent out an email that was stunning in its ignorance just this week in reaction to what our party, our governor, who I support in this veto, has said, which is the failure to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act in North Carolina, I believe, has been one of the biggest policy blunder in our state in at least the last 10 years. These are not illegal aliens, sir. You also misunderstand what we're asking for. We are asking for affordable health care to be expanded to people who are working North Carolinians. They're doing exactly what we asked them to do. They are working jobs and they make too much money to qualify for Medicaid.
Exactly.
Not enough to qualify for subsidies like so many do. So we have about 500,000 people stuck in that gap who are working jobs every day trying to support their families, and the state of North Carolina for 9 years now has said to them, we offer you nothing, absolutely nothing. And hospitals are suffering. Rural hospitals are closing. Our local hospitals here in Charlotte are begging to expand Medicaid. It's the right thing to do economically. It's the right thing to do morally. And the Republicans will not even talk about it. And in fact, the email that I mentioned from Speaker Moore shows that he doesn't even understand what we're asking for. He's saying that the governor's insisting on Medicaid for all. That's never what we've asked for. Medicaid for all is something very different than expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, and he should know that.
By the way, originally we were supposed to have Speaker Moore on the program this week. Couldn't make it this time, but we, of course, hope to have him back at some point. What do you disagree with what she said? Do you disagree with the number in the gap? Do you disagree in philosophy? What do you disagree with what she just said?
Well, I think there are 2 pieces to this. One is from a pure political policy perspective. The Republicans have told the governor, let's get a budget done. We are prepared to come back to the table to meet that question and to fill that gap, if that's what it really is. It's millions and millions of dollars at risk. I'm not disagreeing that there's a health care issue. Yeah. We've had that conversation here for months. but we're putting at risk all of the other components for a policy agenda by the governor.
What about the point he's making? Is it worth it to put all those other things at risk for the time being?
I think we have to push back against that very, very hard, because there is nothing that excludes a lot of the things that are in the current version of the budget from being in any compromise budget. So much so that the governor himself has added a lot of those components as a part of a compromise into his compromise budget. So I think that talking point doesn't fly. Second piece that we have to keep in mind is that the best way to start negotiations is to use the process that's set forth by the North Carolina Constitution. There is a veto, there's a veto override vote, and then once the vote does in fact fail, then you come to the negotiating table, because we have to have a budget. So I think that we have to remember that this is not about placing blame. This is about placing the needs of North Carolinians first and actually getting a budget done by everyone backing away from their corners and actually coming to a real table and having a real negotiation.
And my understanding is that offer's been made and the governor's refused to do it.
The Constitution sets forth a very clear process. You vote on the veto override. We are ready to vote on the veto override. It's been on the calendar for weeks now. Let's have the vote, and let's actually have a real negotiation. That's the process.
And the governor's offered a compromise. We have not heard any compromise from the Republicans. I think they've forgotten how to negotiate after so many years of a supermajority. They've forgotten what it's like.
Let me switch now to the Board of Elections, because, again, not always the sexiest of topics, but this past week, it's like, what in the world is going on up there? The chairman of the North Carolina Board of Elections is out. He resigned this week after opened a statewide conference for hundreds of election officials with a rather crass joke. His resignation means the board will soon have its fourth chair since early last December. Speaking of the Board of Elections, members are working to figure out what type of voting equipment to use for elections. Monday, they voted 3-2 to hold a meeting next month to change the state requirements for new voting equipment. The board had to wait at least 15 days to change the rules there. The language proposed for consideration next month would have effectively shot down newer equipment from a vendor that uses touchscreen voting, but produces a paper ballot that has a barcode. It doesn't actually show you what you did. It shows a barcode, and that's a sticking point for a lot of folks. But then on Thursday, the board split vote 2-2 along party lines regarding what type of voting machines will be acceptable in the future. And we have to say, a lot of this is because of that resignation, and this has got to happen. We've got to pick out this voting equipment like this year.
Absolutely. We have counties across the state saying, could we hurry up and make a decision, folks? Because these elections are coming, primaries are coming, and we need to be ready. And Trump-style denial of our vulnerabilities are not going to protect us in this situation. It is critical that we have the right voting machines to count every vote accurately. It sounds to me like the proposal that they're going to vote on in a couple of weeks is for human readable paper ballots that we can audit later. Yes, I support that plan. I would hope that the partisanship could fall away and we could get this done and get it done quickly in time for the upcoming elections.
Because as it stands right now, the thing they're talking about would produce a barcode that you can't actually see what
voters want to see that that their votes are accurate.
All right, we want to talk about the RNC, but we got to take a break. So let's talk about the RNC on the other side of this break.